recollect some basic facts about convergence and so on. So let me continue that for maybe the next 10-15 minutes. So this will be sort of a revision or just some recap of some basic facts. So, so we stopped at this point that a series is convergent if and only if it is Cauchy, which basically means that for all epsilon, there exists a capital N, so that if you sum up, in some sense, the tail of the series beyond the integer capital N, then that summation is almost zero, right? So it's smaller than epsilon in terms of magnitude. Okay, so so this turns out, I mean, one way is obvious, which means that if something is right, if something is convergent, then it is automatically Cauchy. But the converse is also true. If something is Cauchy, then it is convergent, and this is because the complex plane is a complete metric space, right? Okay, so here's another definition which we'll need. So we say that summation an converges absolutely okay if you take the magnitude of each of these complex numbers, that corresponding series converges. Now notice that this is actually a series of real numbers. Okay, so we say that our original series is absolutely convergent if once you take the magnitudes, you get something that is convergent. And why is this a useful notion to have? It's because of the next proposition, that if the series obtained by taking the magnitudes converges, then in fact the original series also converges. Okay, now leave the proof as an exercise if you haven't seen it before. And the idea is, this is where Cauchy's criteria turns out to be very useful. So it's basically, I mean, the hint is Cauchy's criteria and triangle inequality. Okay. All right, and an important remark is that the converse is not true. Okay, and the standard example is basically given by, you just take an to be the alternating series. Then you basically have that summation an converges. And if you remember your sort of undergrad analysis, this is due to the so-called Dirichlet test. And on the other hand, if you look at the series obtained by taking the absolute values, that is, of course, our favorite example of a divergent series, namely the harmonic series. Right, so I'm taking n to be 1, etc. So this, of course, diverges. So the converse is not true. So you might have a convergent series which is not absolutely convergent. Okay. All right. So that is about convergence of a series of numbers. Now, what do you do if you have a sequence of functions? So here are a couple of definitions. So let Fn be a sequence of functions. They don't have to be continuous. They don't have to be, I mean, of course, not differentiable and so on, right? So just take some arbitrary sequence of functions. Then we have actually two notions of convergence. So one, we say that Fn converges to F pointwise if for all z in omega, Fn of z converges to f of z. Right, so you just plug in some z and the resulting sequence of complex numbers converges to f evaluated at z. So if you unravel the definition, so this is equivalent to the following statement: for all z and for all epsilon, there exists a capital N, and now this capital N is going to depend on epsilon and the point you're looking at, of course an integer, such that for all n bigger than n, Fn of z minus f of z is less than epsilon. Okay. A stronger notion, which is in some sense more useful when you're doing analysis, is the notion of uniform convergence. So I'll usually denote it by a little UC on top, right? So this is uniform convergence. If for all epsilon, there exists a capital N, now depending only on epsilon, such that for all n bigger than capital N, and for all z in omega, we have this. Okay, so another equivalent way of saying this is that if you take the supremum over this entire domain of Fn of z minus f of z, that is less than epsilon. And this is true for all n large enough. Okay, so why is this a useful notion to have? So let me remind you of this. So if this is a sequence of continuous functions, and let's say we have Fn converging to f uniformly, then this implies that f is also continuous. And of course, this is not true for pointwise limits, right? So this is true only for uniform limits. So now, of course, if we can talk about convergence of sequence of functions, one can talk about convergence of series of functions. So here's a definition. So again, let Fn be a sequence of functions. Okay, and we let Sn of z be the sequence of partial sums, right? So we take the sum of these functions from k going from 0 to n. So we then have the following definitions. So firstly, we say that the summation Fn converges pointwise to f, and of course we write this as this. If Sn converges to f pointwise. Okay, so similar to how we talk about convergence of series of complex numbers, right? You just look at the partial sums. Similarly, we say that this converges absolutely if the if once you take absolute value, this converges. Okay. Then we say that Fn summation Fn converges uniformly to some limit function f, and we denote it by summation Fn equal to f if the corresponding sequence of partial sums converges uniformly. Okay. But actually, when you're doing complex analysis, what is a more important notion is not just uniform convergence, but what is called as compact convergence. So we say that this series converges compactly to, let's say, a limiting function f, if for every compact set K, if you look at the restriction of this sum to K, this converges uniformly. Okay, so what that actually means is that so let me maybe let me expand on what this means. So this is equivalent to the following statement: for all, let me rewrite this. So for all compact subsets, so this basically means compact subset. Okay, that's a standard piece of notation. And for all epsilon, there exists a capital N, which is, I hope I'm audible. The lights just went out.
Yes,
but,
yes,
yeah. Okay. Yeah. Thanks. Right. So, there exists an integer which depends on epsilon and capital K, such that if you take the supremum of, let's say, Sn of z minus f of z, and now the supremum is taken over this compact subset that is less than epsilon. Okay. And this happens for all n bigger than capital N. Okay, so that means this capital N might sort of blow up as you're approaching the boundary of the open set, but as long as you restrict yourself to a compact subset, you have uniform convergence, right? So that is what this. So in practice, in complex analysis, you'll almost never get uniform convergence on the entire domain. But what you will most often encounter is basically uniform convergence on compact subsets of the domain. Okay, and you'll see an example just in a moment. Okay, so with this sort of quick review, let me talk about convergence of power series. Okay, so let's start with an example. So maybe I should say that a power series centered at some point z0 is a series of the form summation an z minus z0 to the n going from 0 to infinity. Right, so you can of course write out what this means. This basically means a0 plus a1 times z minus z0 plus a2 times z minus z0 squared and so on, right? So I want to now discuss when is this series of functions actually a convergent series, right? So let's start with an example, and in some sense this is sort of the prototypical example. Okay, so so this is sort of the most important example to keep in mind. Okay, and that's namely the geometric series. Okay, so what is the geometric series? You basically, it's a power series where you take an to be always 1. Okay, and for simplicity, I'm also going to assume that z0 is equal to 0. Right, so I'm going to take a power series that's centered at the origin, just for simplicity. I mean, you can do whatever I write down, you can always translate by z0 to to get a geometric series that's centered at an arbitrary point z0. Okay. So just to simplify notation, I mean the main ideas are more important than the notation. So just to simplify it, let's assume that z0 is 0. So then the geometric series is basically a series of the form z to the n going from 0 to infinity. So this is 1 plus z squared, etc. Okay, so now I want to understand on what regions of the complex plane or for what complex number z is this convergent. So that's the question. For what z in C is the series convergent? And is it...
Professor Ved, can I ask you something?
Yeah, sure.
In the series, with the definition of series,
Right.
all AIs are reals, right?
No. They're complex.
No. Down. Just now when you defined.
The power series, is it?
Oh yeah, the power series. Yeah.
No. Sorry, I should have mentioned. ANs are complex numbers.
Oh.
Yeah. So they're power series with complex coefficients.
Okay.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. So the question we wish to ask ourselves, although yeah, it's true that most of the examples we'll see right now will have real coefficients, but the theory remains the same if you assume AN to be complex, right? Okay, so let's ask ourselves for what complex numbers is this geometric series actually convergent, and then once you know that it's convergent, you can ask stronger questions, whether it's absolutely convergent, whether it's compactly convergent, uniformly convergent, and so on, right? So to analyze this, I need to analyze the nth partial sum, right? Because after all, that's what decides convergence. So let's try to find a sum for this. Okay, so then this is a nice exercise, and in fact, we used this factorization before. So remember our proof of complex differentiability of monomials, right? We used a particular factorization theorem, right? So maybe let me remind you of that. Well, that's a very very useful, elementary but very useful factorization. So recall that we used this factorization, right? Maybe I'll right. So this is good. So this is this. Maybe I'll write it with the n+1 right now. Okay. So then this is basically just this. Okay. So if you put zeta equal to 1, sorry, this multiplied by zeta minus z, right? Or maybe I should write it like this. Sorry. I should write it like this. So if zeta is not equal to z, you have the following expansion. Okay. So now if you put zeta equal to 1, this implies that the series 1 plus z squared, etc., up to z to the n, which in our notation is just the partial sum, nth partial sum of the geometric series. That's precisely 1 minus z to the n plus 1 by 1 minus z. Okay, so now we need to understand when this has a limit. So there are several cases. So the first case is suppose mod z. Let's dispose of the bad cases first. Okay, so suppose mod z has absolute value bigger than 1. Then remember there's this well-known divergence theorem or divergence test. So what does the divergence test say? That if you have a convergent series then the nth term of that series must converge to 0, right? Because if you keep adding things that don't converge to 0, then there's no way that you're going to get a convergent series, right? So the divergent series test implies, since the nth term is mod z to the, is z to the n, which in absolute value is bigger than 1, this implies that the series diverges. Okay. So is there anyone who wants me to repeat what the divergence test is, or you're all familiar with it? Okay, so just by the divergence test, we know that if absolute value of z is bigger than 1, then the series certainly diverges. So all we need to really worry about is what happens when the absolute value is less than 1. So in that case, if you look at so let's say, so suppose this is less than equal to r, which is strictly less than 1, right? Then what happens to mod z to the n? If you take the absolute value of z to the n, that's going to be less than r to the n. But remember, r is a number that's strictly smaller than 1. So as you let n go to infinity, this is going to go to 0. So in particular, so of course, this just tells you that the eventual nth term of the series goes to 0, but we actually have a summation formula, right? So what this tells you is that if you take the n plus first term, that of course also goes to 0 as n goes to 0. Okay, but then you basically have this very nice formula, right? And now if you look at this term, as n goes to infinity, that term is going to go to 0. So the limit as n goes to infinity is just going to be 1 by 1 minus z. Okay. So this implies that when mod z is less than 1, then basically Sn of z not only converges, but we have actually found the limit. It converges to 1 by 1 minus z. Okay, so that means that the sum of the geometric series as n goes from 0 to infinity is basically this. When mod z is less than 1, and of course it diverges when mod z is bigger than or equal to 1. Okay. So is this clear? This is the most important example. I mean, if you want to understand anything about power series, this is the prototypical example. So any questions on this?
Professor Ved.
Yeah.
Actually, I think that the complex plane is the most appropriate area than real line to study power series. Because if you take 1 upon 1 by 1 upon 1 minus x and ask to find out the radius, the convergence of this, it is little bit cumbersome. But
no, it's the same. In this case, it's, I mean, I agree with you that it is.
If you go the complex place, then it is very clear that the radius of convergence is 1.
No, I think that's not quite true. I mean, in this case, it is true that if you want to really understand power series, you have to look at the complex plane. That's the sort of correct regime in which you should talk about power series. But on the other hand, for this particular series, it's if you want to prove convergence on the real line, is the exact same proof. There's no no difference.
Yes, it is case. But if you suppose some 1 upon 1 by x, this is a function where x not equals to 1,
right?
And so therefore, if you ask to find out the power series expansion and then find the radius of convergence.
But it's
So
the exact same thing.
think
I'll
it is same, but I think this is complex plane is the most appropriate area. This is very
yeah,
nice.
that's correct. But yeah, in this case, there is not much difference between the real case and the complex. But yeah, it is true that I mean, for power series, you should look at the complex plane. That's the correct domain of definition of power series. Okay. All right. So let's maybe move on. So yeah, actually, before moving on, I can't resist to say something more about this series. So let me make a remark. So notice that that this formula. So one thing you should be absolutely clear in your mind is that this formula is only true if mod z is less than 1. If mod z is bigger than equal to 1, this formula is complete nonsense because the series on the left diverges, right? So this is something that you should have absolutely clear in your mind, that this formula is valid only in the region where mod z is less than 1. So maybe it's useful to also draw the picture, right? So this is basically this disk of radius 1 around 0. So in this case, this is sort of the good region, and this is sort of the bad region, the rest of it, right? And this is simply the disk of radius 1 around 0. Okay. But on the other hand, if you, so let me make the remark that so the function 1 by 1 minus z is actually defined, and by the quotient rule is actually C differentiable on the entire complex plane except where the denominator vanishes. And where does the denominator vanish? That's at this point. So let me draw a circle around this point. This is the worst point in some sense, because even the function on the right actually blows up at that point, right? So on C minus the point z equals 1, right? So then this function 1 by 1 minus z is basically called the analytic continuation. So I'll define what analyticity means at the end of today's lecture. We call this function as the analytic continuation of this power series, summation n going from 0 to infinity z to the n. Why? Because this power series is only defined inside this good region, because that's the only place it's convergent. And I'll state a theorem in a minute, which implies that this actually defines a holomorphic function on this disk. Okay, but it's only defined on the disk. On the other hand, the function on the right is actually defined everywhere, right? So we say that this is the function on the right is an analytic continuation of this geometric series. So you should, an analogy is that suppose you are in a dark room and in the corner of a dark room, right? And suppose you have a flashlight. Now, suppose you sort of raise your hand a bit, the flashlight will illuminate a certain amount of area, right? So you should think of this as sort of the area that is illuminated by that flashlight. But then once a certain amount of area is illuminated, you can walk over to the edge of the area that's illuminated, hold the flashlight up, and again, a larger area will be illuminated, right? So you'll be exploring more amount of the room. And so analytic continuation is something similar, that you might have a holomorphic function that has a certain definition in a certain region, but then by some clever algebraic manipulation, so for instance, here we're able to find the sum of the geometric series, you find a function that is actually now defined over the entire complex plane except at one point, right? So that is what analytic continuation does, right? And maybe I'll say a few words about this again at the end of the lecture. But another remark I can't help but making is that on social media, you basically see things of the following form. And I know this because one of my cousins once sent over something to me because he was quite impressed by this seemingly absurd calculation. And of course, it was a completely nonsense calculation. But the formula that he sent to me was something that looked like this. And I don't know, maybe quite a few of you might have seen this formula floating around on Facebook or Twitter or something, right? And of course, how do you sort of get to this formula? What they do is they simply plug in z equals -1. So if you plug in z equals -1 here, this function is basically just half, right? And then they, of course, do something that's absurd for a mathematics student. They also plug in -1 in the geometric series and obtain this formula. But of course, this formula is completely incorrect simply because this equation holds only in the regime where mod z is less than 1. So substituting z equals -1 on both sides is an illegal operation, right? So the formula is completely incorrect. But in some sense, what this formula is getting at is that you have an analytic continuation of the geometric series to a much larger domain. So that's the right way of interpreting nonsensical equations of this type. Okay. All right. Any questions on the geometric series? Okay. If not, let me now state the sort of fundamental theorem for power series. So this can be safely called the fundamental theorem for, I don't know if it is actually a name that's used, but I like to call it the fundamental theorem of power series. Right? Every subject must have its fundamental theorem. So consider a power series of the form an z minus z naught to the n, right? And an, as usual, is allowed to be a complex number. Okay, and let R, capital R, be this number 1 over the lim sup of an raised to 1 over n. Okay, and this could be any number from 0 to infinity. Okay. Right. So if you don't remember what lim sup is, I'll remind you of the definition in a minute. But what this theorem says is that we have the following behavior. So one, the series converges absolutely and compactly on the disk of radius capital R around z0. Okay. So it converges not only absolutely, but also compactly. Okay. And the second point is that if mod z minus z0 is bigger than capital R, okay, so in our notation, what this means is that z belongs to the complement of the closure of the disk. Okay. Then the series diverges. Okay. So an important remark is that there is no conclusion for when mod z minus z naught is actually equal to R, right? Because remember, this was the open disk, right? So you have the set of points. So let me maybe just write down. This is the set of points such that absolute value of z minus z naught is strictly less than R. And the second point says something about when the distance is strictly bigger than capital R. So you don't say anything about the boundary case where the distance might be equal to R. So one should always draw a picture. So let's say this is the complex plane. And let's say this is our complex number z naught. Then what you get is basically a disk of this sort. Okay, of radius capital R. So this region inside the disk is good. The region outside the disk is bad. And the region on the boundary is inconclusive. So to decide convergence on the boundary, you have to actually do a careful case-by-case analysis. Okay. So then our definition is that R is called the radius of convergence. Okay, and the disk is called the disk of convergence. Okay. Right. So before I give you examples, let me remind you of the definition of limb soup. So this is also sometimes denoted by limb with an upper bar. Okay, so essentially, I mean, what the limb soup means is that it's basically sort of the supremum of all possible subsequential limits. So if you're given a sequence, and if it's, say, a bounded sequence, then by this famous Bolzano-Weierstrass theorem, you know that there is a subsequence that converges, right? So you take all possible subsequential limits and take the supremum of that. That is essentially limb soup. But actually in practice, I find the following characterization more useful. So that is what I'm going to give to you. So given a sequence Bn in R, so now notice that to talk about limb soup, you have to restrict attention to real numbers, sequence of real numbers. Okay. So we say that capital L is basically the limb soup as n goes to infinity of the sequence Bn if the following two conditions hold. Right. So firstly, for all epsilon, I'll draw a picture in a minute. For all epsilon, there exists a natural number, capital N, such that whenever n is bigger than capital N, Bn is less than or equal to L plus epsilon. Or I mean, you can take strictly less than, it doesn't matter. Okay. And secondly, for all epsilon and for all n, so look at the difference between I mean, there exists in the first case and there's a for all capital N in the second case. There exists an n bigger than n such that Bn is going to be bigger than L minus epsilon. So the second property is actually equivalent to the following statement: for all epsilon, there exists a sequence nj going to infinity such that the corresponding Bnj is bigger than L minus epsilon. Okay. So, I mean, there are a lot of logical quantifiers. So instead of that, it's always good to look at a picture. So the picture is the following. So you have this capital L, you have this L plus epsilon, L minus epsilon. So the first condition, what it says is that eventually, all terms are going to lie on the left of L plus epsilon. And what the second condition says that infinitely many terms are going to lie on the right of L minus epsilon. Okay. So in practice, I find this a better definition to use. Okay, and now similarly, one can also define.
Sir,
Yeah.
sir, please explain that graphical representation once again.
Right. So what does the first condition say? That suppose you fix an epsilon, right? So I give you an epsilon, and you look at L plus epsilon. So what the first condition says is that there is some capital N, so that beyond that point, so if you take n bigger than capital N, then this the corresponding term in the sequence Bn is going to be less than L plus epsilon. So that means eventually all terms, so in this case n bigger than capital N, eventually all terms are going to lie to the left of L plus epsilon. Okay. And similarly, what this says is, again, you fix an epsilon. This says that there is a sequence going off to infinity, so that Bnj lies to the right of L minus epsilon. So that just says that there is an infinitely many terms that lie to the right of L minus epsilon. Okay. Does that, yeah?
So how it is different from the usual limit?
Maybe let me put down. So this is the first remark. The second remark is that for usual limit, the second point should be that for all epsilon, there exists a capital N such that for all n bigger than n. So in the case of limit, you basically here also you want that eventually all terms are lying to the right of L minus epsilon. Right. So this part is the same as the usual limit, but here you when you define limit superior, you basically relax the requirement a bit. Okay, so that's the difference between limit superior and limit and a genuine limit. Does that make sense?
Sir, give some example, sir.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's see if I can.
Minus 1 to the power of n if you
Yeah,
take
actually, yeah, minus 1 to the, thanks.
yeah.
Just
So
take
here
minus
it doesn't
1 to the-
exist, but limsup exists.
Exactly. Yeah, thanks. So
Sir, what is 2 here for usual limit 2 point? What is that 2?
yeah, so
for
the
usual
second
limit 2?
yeah. So the second point is that for all epsilon, there exists an n, so is that for all n, Bn has to be bigger than L minus epsilon, right? So the second point for usual limit has to be replaced by something that looks identical to the first point, except the sign is different. So let me explain with this example. So yeah, this is a good, I mean, the most basic example to see the difference between limit superior and limit. So this is a sequence that oscillates between -1 and +1, right? Or in other words, it's basically -1 if n is odd and is +1 if n is even. Okay. So now clearly the limit does not exist, right? But my claim is that the lim sup actually exists, and that is equal to 1. Okay, so let's see why that is the case. So from my definition or equivalent characterization, I have to basically check these two, right? So check the first point for all epsilon. So take capital N to be 1. Okay. Then for all n bigger than 1, what is the sequence an? An is less than, an is either, we know that this is either plus or minus 1, right? So in particular, it will always be less than 1 plus epsilon, right? So in my picture, I'm claiming that the limit superior is 1. So you have to basically look at this interval 1 minus epsilon to 1 plus epsilon. And now the first point says that eventually every term is going to lie to the left of 1 plus epsilon, but that's trivially true because the terms are only plus minus 1, right? So trivially, all of these terms are less than equal to 1 plus epsilon, right? How do I check? Now you'll see the importance of the second point. So for all epsilon, there exists a sequence nj going to infinity such that anj is bigger than 1 minus epsilon. So there are infinitely many terms that lie to the right of 1 minus epsilon. But what is the subsequence I should pick? If I want an infinite number of terms to lie to the right of 1 minus epsilon, what is the sequence I should pick?
Sir, even term, sir. Even term.
Just even integers, right? So just take nj to be 2j, let's say, right? So then anj will be equal to 1, which is of course bigger than 1 minus epsilon. So in the second point, you're actually relaxing the requirement. You only want an infinite number of terms to lie to the left of 1 minus epsilon. So is the difference between limit and limit superior clear now?
Sir, yes, sir.
Yeah, okay.
Yes, sir.
Good. So similarly, one can actually define limit inferior. Okay, and I'll keep this as a reading exercise. Or actually, you should not even read. You should try to imagine what a definition would look like. And essentially, you have to flip these two conditions. Okay, that will define a limit inferior. And the key point, so the key point here, actually there are two, right. So the key point is the following, that the limit inferior of any sequence is always smaller than or equal to the limit superior, and the limit as n goes to infinity of Bn exists if and only if the two are equal. Okay, and in that case, that will be the limit. So in the above example, what do you think should be the limit inferior of the sequence minus 1 to the n?
Minus 1.
Minus 1, right? So in the previous example, the lim inf should actually just be minus 1. And so try to frame a definition properly. I mean, part of sort of doing math is also knowing how to precisely define things. Try to define it in a way so that you'll have this inequality. And in particular, for this example, you'll basically have that the lim inf is minus 1. Okay. So I'll leave that as an exercise. So another sort of important point is that you'll notice that in the definition, of this R, I'm basically taking the lim sup of these nth roots, right? And in your calculus or analysis classes, you must have studied the difference between sort of the root test and the ratio test. And in many examples, it's actually convenient to use the ratio test rather than the. So what happens is the following, and this is an exercise in the tutorial section. So hopefully whoever is your tutor will go over this exercise. It's a highly recommended exercise. The point is that the ratio test, this limit exists, implies that this limit also exists. or I should say 1 by this, and is equal okay, so if you get lucky, if the ratios actually converge, then the roots will also converge. Okay. Sorry, I shouldn't put 1 by. Sorry. Yeah, this is the right thing. Okay. So then the radius of convergence will basically just be 1 over whatever this limit is. Okay. And in fact, more generally, and this is the exercise in the tutorial section, you can actually prove that the lim_inf of these ratios is bounded above by the lim_inf of the roots, which in turn is bounded above, of course, by the lim_sup of the roots, which in turn is bounded above by the lim_sup of the ratios. Okay, so now the limiting ratio existing will imply that these two will be equal. And then by the sandwich theorem or the squeeze theorem, all of them will have to be equal. So in particular, these two limits exist and they're equal. So the limit of the nth roots exist and that will equal the limit of the ratios. Okay, so this is a highly recommended exercise in the tutorial section. Okay, so any questions on this theorem, on the statement of this theorem? I guess I've explained all the important terms, right? So any questions on this before we move on to examples? Okay, if not, let's move on to examples. So let me start at the beginning again with the geometric series. Oh, I should mention that that the proof of the theorem is actually by comparison to the geometric series. So I'll upload some notes, I guess typed up notes from a course that I taught at IISc a few years back, and that has the full proof. So if you're interested, you can take a look at the full proof. Okay. So that's why the geometric series is actually the most important power series. Okay, because any other power series, to decide convergence, you usually just compare it to the geometric series. Okay. All right. So let's go back to the geometric series. So we have already seen that this is convergent for mod z less than 1, and it diverges if mod z is bigger than 1. Okay, but let's try to apply the theorem. So let's apply the theorem. Okay, but of course in practice it goes the other way, because to prove the theorem you actually need to understand the geometric series, right? But just as an example, let me tell you in this basic case how to apply the theorem. So in the theorem, you are basically now taking all the coefficients to be 1 and the center to be 0, right? So then, what is R? By definition, this is basically the lim_sup of the nth roots, right? But that is basically the lim_sup. The nth root of 1 is always 1. So the lim_sup of 1, which is 1. So you get that the radius of convergence is 1, something that we already knew from our independent analysis before this, right? Okay, so this at least checks out correctly. And of course, when this happens, then the theorem implies that we have divergence. So that leaves the boundary. So I said, remember that the theorem does not tell us anything about the boundary, right? But our independent analysis has shown us that on the boundary also we have divergence. Okay. All right. So let's go to the next example. Let's talk about n going from 1 to infinity, z to the n by n. Okay, so if you are to compare this to the theorem, we are basically taking an to be 1 over n and z0 to be again 0, centered at 0, right? So let's compute the radius of convergence. So what is r? R is basically the limb sup of an raised to 1 over n, which in this case will basically be limb sup of n raised to, right, so 1 over n raised to 1 over n, right? But we already know that if you take the limit as n goes to infinity of n raised to 1 over n, that's equal to 1, right? How do you show this? I mean, one easy way is using L'Hopital's rule, right? So in particular, this limb sup is going to also be equal to 1. So the radius of convergence is going to be 1. So the theorem tells us that that this firstly converges on mod z less than 1 and it diverges on mod z equal to 1. Sorry, mod z bigger than 1. Okay, so now again the question is, what about the boundary? So question, what about when mod z is actually equal to 1? So let's draw a picture. So we have the origin here, we have the disk here, and we have the boundary points here, right? So let's first take the sort of nicest, I mean, or the simplest, most obvious boundary point, z equal to 1. So when z is equal to 1, what is the series? This is our favorite harmonic series. So this diverges. Okay, let's take a diametrically opposite point. Let's take z equal to -1. So when z is equal to -1, you get -1 to the n by n, which so maybe I should write it like this. Which is -1 to the n by n, which converges by what is called as the Dirichlet test. Okay. So all right. So yeah.
Leibniz test, sir.
Pardon. Can you repeat? I didn't.
So actually, I told that is Leibniz test, maybe the convergence.
I see. I don't know what Leibniz test is, but I think this is called the Dirichlet test, which basically, I mean, essentially, what this says is that if you have a decreasing sequence which converges to 0, yeah, which converges to 0. So that's in particular.
It's called a Dirichlet test.
Pardon?
It's called Dirichlet test.
Yeah, this is called Dirichlet test, right? So yeah. Okay. So then the point is that this converges. Okay, that's the Dirichlet test. So now we have found one point where you have divergence. We have found another point where you have convergence. So what about in between, right? I mean, you have this entire region of the boundary. What happens here? So for this, there's actually what is called as Abel's test, which is a generalization of Dirichlet's test. And again, I think this is there in the typed up notes. But Abel's test basically tells you that that this particular thing converges everywhere. So converges on basically mod z equal to 1 as long as z is not equal to 1. Okay, so that means you have actually convergence everywhere except possibly this. I mean, of course, you know that it diverges at 1, right? So, so except that point, at every other boundary point, you actually have convergence. Okay, and this follows from this Abel summation formula, which is sort of like a discrete version of integration by parts. Okay, so if you're interested, I mean, even the wiki article on this is surprisingly good. So you can take a look at that, right? So another series I want to look at is, now let's say z to the n by n squared. So instead of n, I take n squared. So again, an is basically n to the minus 2. So then again, what is the lim sup of the nth roots? Well, just raising it to square doesn't change much. This will again be equal to 1. Okay, so the radius of convergence, which is the reciprocal of this, is also equal to 1. Okay, so then the theorem implies that this series firstly converges in this unit disk, and it diverges if mod z is bigger than 1, right? Now again, what happens at the boundary? Okay, so on the boundary, you notice that if you take the absolute value, suppose you have mod z equal to 1 and you take the absolute value, then this series is basically going to be 1 by n squared, and this converges. Right, this is one of the most famous example of a convergent series, and in fact, just a sort of factoid, this has a very nice summation. It's actually equal to pi squared by 6, right? So anyway, we don't care about what the sum is. The fact is that it converges, which means that this series converges absolutely. Right, because you took absolute values and the resulting series converge. So this converges absolutely, but then this implies that the original series also converges. On the entire boundary. Okay. So is that clear? So there's just the subtle difference between taking n in the denominator and n squared in the denominator, right? But that makes a huge difference when it comes to convergence. All right, so my fourth example is possibly the most important for series other than the geometric series. And this is the series given by z to the n by n factorial, okay? So the convention always is to put 0 factorial to be 1. Okay, so then if you write this down, this is a special series, so it's good to write down the first few terms. It has this form. So 3 factorial, which is 6, etc. Okay. So now the root test turns out to be hard. So if I want to apply the theorem, I'll take an to be 1 by n factorial, right? So now root test is hard. Because how do you analyze the nth root of n factorial, right? I mean, it can be done by, for instance, taking the logarithm and doing some careful analysis, but that's hard. So instead, let's compute the ratios. So let's calculate what the nth ratio is. So that's the ratio of an plus 1 by an in absolute value. So that is going to be 1 by n plus 1 factorial times n factorial, right? Which is of course 1 by n plus 1. And so the ratios actually do have a limit. and the limit is 0. So this implies that the limit as n goes to infinity of an to the 1 by n is also equal to 0. But the radius of convergence was the reciprocal, so the radius of convergence is going to be infinity. So now we have a power series that actually converges everywhere. So this implies that converges compactly and absolutely, in fact, on the entire complex plane. Okay. And so here's a definition. We define the exponential function by x of z is whatever is the value of this series at z, right? So this is a definition of this new function, and in the third lecture, I'm going to basically derive all these wonderful properties of this new function, right? Okay, so now we have a function that converges, a power series that converges everywhere. How about a power series that converges nowhere, except, at maybe z equal to 0, right? So, so my fifth example is consider, just invert this example. So just consider n factorial times z to the n, okay? Then in this case, r is going to be 0. So the series converges only at z equal to 0, at no other point, okay? All right, so I hope these examples are enough, and you can go back and try to look up some textbook and find more examples of power series where you can play around with trying to calculate this lim sup and trying to find the radius of convergence and so on. So why is this important for us? Right? Why are power series important? They're important because they provide us with a huge class of holomorphic functions. And in fact, in some sense, which you'll see after you talk about the Cauchy integral formula, in some sense, these are all the possible holomorphic functions there are. Okay, so that is why this is an important class. Okay, so what is the main theorem here? That's the following. So consider the function defined by a power series. Where we assume that the radius of convergence, which remember was this, we assume that this is strictly positive. So I don't want a series of this type. So this is bad, right? I don't want a series of this type. I want something whose radius of convergence is strictly positive. So then I basically consider this function on this disk dr around z0. Okay, this open disk. So then the conclusion of the theorem is that f is actually holomorphic. So that means it's complex differentiable at all points on the disk. And moreover, we have a nice formula to calculate the derivative. So f prime of z is given by term differentiation. Okay, so what this formula means is that if you look at the nth term, if you differentiate the nth term, you will basically end up with this term, right? So what this theorem is telling you is that not only is it holomorphic, but to find the complex derivative, you basically just calculate the term-wise derivative and add all of those up, okay? again, I won't prove this theorem, but the proof is there in the lecture notes that I'll share with Suman. Okay, so proof is a reading exercise. Okay, so is the statement of the theorem clear? Any questions about this? Okay, if not, let me make a remark that if you look at the derivative, so just look at the this formula. So the formula for the derivative again gives you another power series. So this is another power series. So now this is wonderful because you can apply induction. You can just keep repeating this process. You have another power series which is f prime of z. Again, apply this theorem. F prime of z will be differentiable. You can calculate its derivative and so on. So once you have a power series expansion, you have infinite differentiability for free from this theorem. Okay, so let me write that down as a corollary. So simple corollary is that suppose f is as above. Okay, and I'm always now assuming that the radius of convergence is strictly positive, right? So I won't keep repeating this. So then the conclusion is that f is infinitely differentiable. Okay, on of course the domain, the disk, the open domain, right? And moreover, one can actually calculate the kth derivative. So moreover, we have the following formula to calculate the kth derivative. So this is the kth complex derivative. Okay, so this has a nice formula. This is the summation as n goes from k to infinity, n times n minus 1, etc., up to n minus k plus 1 times the coefficient an and z to the n minus k. So of course this looks slightly sort of scarier formula than the earlier one, but again you're doing exactly the same thing. You're just differentiating each term. And remember, we talked about derivatives of polynomials, right? So that's exactly what is happening. You just differentiate each term. Every time you differentiate, you will basically pull down one power. So the first time you differentiate, you pull down this power, and the exponent of z becomes z to the n minus 1. Then you again differentiate, you pull down another n minus 1 now, and the power, the exponent of z becomes n minus 2. You differentiate once more, and so you keep doing that k times. You'll basically pull down n minus k plus 1 eventually, right? So in particular, what this implies is that you can actually calculate the coefficient of your power series in terms of sorry, this should not be z to the n minus k. This should be z minus z naught to the n minus k, right? Because our series is centered at z naught. So now if you plug in z equal to z naught, so just plug in z equal to z naught, then we basically get this formula for the nth coefficient. You differentiate f n number of times and then divide by n factorial. Okay, so this n factorial basically comes about because of this. Okay, is that clear? Any questions?
Sir, please repeat this once again.
Okay, what do you want me to repeat?
Please repeat this once again.
Or the entire corollary, or
an equal to f n z by factorial, and how can it get?
Oh yeah. So let's. So So let's prove this. Okay, so how would you prove this? So what is the nth derivative? Okay, by this formula, so maybe I should have, sorry for mixing up the exponents. Maybe I'll remain consistent. So let me call this ak, the kth derivative, and by k factorial. Okay, so what is fk? So by the formula that I have, what is the first term? The first term is when n equal to k, right? So when n equal to k, n minus k is 0. So the first term will basically be something like this. Up to 1 times ak times z minus z naught to the n minus k, but n minus k is 0, so you won't have a z minus z naught. So that's going to be the first term, okay? Then the second term is going to look like the following. So the second term is going to be like this, up to 2. Then the third term is going to look like this, up to 3. Sorry, what am I? Yeah, I guess, do I want it to be the other way, or? Yeah, sorry, this is not correct. I want it to be, let's see.
Where actually they can take directly the power series
Yeah.
and the n times differentiation and substituting the point. They will
Yeah,
get.
that's what I'm trying to do, but I wanted to write down a more general formula. So I
Yeah.
guess, yeah. So anyway, the point of this story is that you'll basically have higher orders of, I mean, you'll have some powers of z minus z naught. So now when you plug in z naught, all of these terms will basically go to 0. Because you have a z minus z naught, you'll only be left with this. So I guess I made a mistake upstairs. So let me correct that. So this should be, this should, I guess, be k minus 1, etc. Wait. Oh, no. That's correct. That is correct. Except I'm basically plugging in n equals k here. So these terms should basically be k minus 1, k minus 2, k, etc. Right? And so also these terms should be adjusted properly. So I'm not writing this down, but there'll be some terms. But the important point is that you have a z minus z naught here. You have a z minus z naught squared, which both of which will be 0 when you plug in z equals z naught. So you get that this is k factorial times ak. Okay. Sorry, Rakesh, is that fine? Yeah, sorry, I messed up the calculations a bit, but yeah, in a sense, you just take the power series and differentiate it k times. That's what happens, and then you plug in z equals z naught. Okay, so all right, so based on this, I now can define an analytic function. Okay, so we say that a function f on some open set, it need not be a disk, is analytic if for all z naught in omega, there exists a radius small r, which of course depends on z naught and is strictly positive, and a sequence of numbers an such that if you restrict your function to this small disk around z naught, then that's given by a power series. Okay. So then you say that your function, so what this means is that your function might be defined on some ridiculous looking open set, but then once you choose a Z0, there exists a small disk around this Z0 in which your function has a power series expansion. Okay. So then a remark to make is analytic implies infinitely complex differentiable. Why? And this is by the corollary, right? Because as soon as, I mean, differentiability is a local property. So as soon as you have a power series expansion, it's infinitely differentiable. And then, in fact, these coefficients, an, cannot be arbitrary. They have to be the nth derivative of f at 0, at z0, divided by n factorial. Okay. So analytic a priori is stronger than holomorphicity. Okay. And this is a fact you will prove later, is that holomorphicity also implies analyticity. Okay, so that, if you think about it, is a remarkable theorem, because I just gave you an example at the start of the first lecture of a smooth function in R, which is which is smooth, infinitely differentiable, but is not analytic, right? So on the other hand, in the holomorphic category, you don't have such bad examples. Okay. So another corollary I have to state, which might seem like a really silly thing to do, but I want to say that power series function is always analytic. So suppose f is given by a power series expansion with radius of convergence equal to r, which is strictly positive, then my claim is that f is analytic on this disk of radius r around P, and in fact for every Z0 in this disk, if you let small r be basically equal to, I'll draw a picture and then it will become clear why this is not a completely trivial statement that I'm making. We basically have the following expansion. We have that f restricted to this disk is given by this. Okay. So that means on the smaller disk, f is equal to its Taylor expansion. Okay, so let me draw a picture. So what is happening is the following. You have a large disk of convergence, right? So the power series is defined on this large disk. Let's take Z0 to be 0 for the time being. And you have this large disk of convergence. Now you take a point here. Okay. The idea in the definition of analyticity is that there should be a power series centered at the point Z0. Already have a power series centered at the point, sorry, maybe Z0 is a bad notation. So I'm taking P as 0 here, right? So P is the center of the larger disk. So the point of the definition of analyticity is that there must be a power series centered at an arbitrary point. Okay, so you must take an arbitrary point and have a power series which is centered around this point. Okay, and what is this? This basically is the distance to the boundary. So if you draw the radius connecting the origin to Z0 and extend that up to the boundary, this distance here is basically r, little r. So it says as long as you can fit this small disk in this larger disk, you have a power series expansion centered around this new point. Okay. So I hope you understand why this theorem or this corollary is not a complete triviality. Okay, so understand the difference between sort of having a power series expansion and analyticity. There is this subtle difference that you should be able to move the center to an arbitrary point. And this corollary says that that can be done. Okay. So now let's, I mean, I won't prove this, but let's look at an example and then maybe I can stop. Let me just say that the proof is basically by binomial theorem. Okay, so instead of giving you the proof, let me illustrate it with an example and then we can stop for the day. I know it has been a really long day for you guys. So let's quickly look at this, our favorite example, the geometric series. Okay, so I want to, let's not call it 1 by 1 minus z. Let's look at the geometric series. So again, I keep reminding you that this basically converges only if mod z is less than 1. Okay, and otherwise it diverges. So I'm basically looking at a unit disk centered at the origin. Okay, and now I want to illustrate analyticity. So I take an arbitrary point just because I want to keep the calculations nice. Let me take a real point on the negative axis. So let's take z0 equal to -12. So how do you expand your function or your power series as a new power series, which is now centered at this point? Okay, so let z0. So maybe I'll write it here. So let z0 be equal to -12. Okay, so we know that on mod z less than 1, which is where z0 lies, right? We know that the geometric series has a nice formula. It's given by 1 by 1 minus z. So now the idea is that this is sort of centered around the origin. I want to move the center. So I'm going to write this in the following way. I'm going to write this as 3/2 minus z plus half. Right? Because if I want the center around -12, I basically need a power series that has terms that look like this. Right? So that's the idea of doing this. And of course, if you simplify, this is the same as 1 by 1 minus z. Right? Okay, so now I take 3/2 common from the denominator. So I write this as 2 by 3 times 1 by 1 minus, 2 by 3 times z plus half. Right, I just pull out 3 by 2 as common. And I call this w. Okay, so now notice that w, if you compute the absolute value, this is going to be 2/3 z plus half. But what is z? Z is a point that that lies inside this disk, right? So what is the farthest point that lies inside this disk? The farthest distance from this is basically this point, right? Or you can equally also use triangle inequality, whichever you prefer. But the point is that this is going to be less than 2 by 3 times 3 by 2. Because the maximum distance away from the point -12 is basically at this other extreme when z is equal to 1, right? That's sort of the farthest point. Okay, so in particular, sorry, I should have a strict inequality here because z is an interior point, right? And this is 1. So mod w is strictly less than 1. So this complex number in absolute value is strictly less than 1. So I can apply the formula for geometric series. So this implies that mod z to the n, I rewrite this as, I expand this using geometric series. So that's going to be 2 by 3 raised to n times z plus half raised to n. Okay, so I've found a power series expansion on which is now centered at half. So centered at minus half. Okay. Now, one thing to notice, and this will be the absolute last thing I do. One thing to notice is that this power series itself might have a radius of convergence that's actually bigger than little r. So let's come back to our example. So I'll leave this as an exercise. So check that summation 2 by 3 has radius of convergence actually 6, sorry, equal to 3. Okay, on the other hand, what was R? R was basically capital R minus Z0 minus P, which in this case was, capital R is 1, Z0 is half. So in this case, it was only half. So the theorem tells you that you'll have it is analytic, you'll have a power series centered at Z0 of radius little r. But in fact, by these algebraic manipulations, you've managed to get a power series that has a larger radius of convergence. So let me again draw a picture explaining how this looks. So you have this original sort of disk of convergence, capital R. Okay, now you have a point here. And you have actually managed to find a power series expansion on a much larger disk. Okay, so you've basically found a much larger disk. Okay, so this is now centered here, and this distance is 3. Okay, so this is another example of analytic continuation. And this is what I meant by my analogy that you're in a dark room, in the corner of a dark room with a flashlight. So that was basically, you were here with a flashlight. You were initially illuminating only this area, right? And now you move over to Z0 equal to half, and you do these, Z0 equal to minus half. And now you have suddenly actually illuminated this much larger region. So in some sense, you have taken your function, which was initially defined in this unit disk, and sort of defined a function that's well defined on a bigger domain. Okay. So this is another nice illustration of the method of analytic continuation, that you have a function defined somewhere, but now you want to define it on a larger domain. And Weierstrass's big idea was that you basically keep doing these power series expansions everywhere. And if you're lucky, you will basically keep expanding your domain. Okay. But of course, now we have much more sophisticated ways of doing analytic continuation. Okay. So maybe this is a good time, good place to finish. Sorry, I went over by 5 minutes. So are there any questions?
Sir,
Yeah.
sir, in power series, the an will always be fn k upon k factorial.
The area or the coefficients, right?
An coefficients.
The an, I see. Yeah. The ans will always be the nth derivative of f at the center divided by n factorial, right?
Okay, sir.
Yeah. Okay, any other questions? So maybe next time I'll start with the principle of analytic continuation, and then maybe I'll move on to these exponential trigonometric functions, etc. Okay. All right. I guess we're at the end of the session, right?
Thank you, Professor Ved.
Yeah. Thanks for having the patience to endure 5 hours of lectures. That's a lot.
Yeah.
Right.
And you two have 3 hours continuous lecture. Maybe
Yeah.
small break.
Right.
So please send the note.
Yeah. I'll send those to Shuman, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Suman, you can send so that he will circulate to all the participants.
Yeah. Sure. Yeah.
So
Sir,
thank
especially
you.
the proof, sir.
Yeah.
Especially the proof of the fundamental theorem of power series. That
I
proof.
think it does have that. If not, I'll quickly type up a proof and send it to him.
Okay, sir. Another request, sir.
Yeah.
Sir, can you recommend one book on this power series?
So I don't know for power series what is a good book. Yeah, I think this power series treatment, I think the textbook that I know, I mean, there's this old textbook of Henri Cartan, which has a lot of discussion about power series. I mean, I guess any standard text on complex analysis, I mean, you can check Alfors, you can check
Conway is also fine.
Churchill
yeah,
Brown.
Conway is fine. Churchill Brown actually is probably more gentler, I guess. So if you want to begin, maybe Brown Churchill is a good place. Otherwise, Stein also has a good Stein Sakari or they have a good exposition also. Yeah.
And sir, the concept of limb suit and limb in.
Yeah, so that is there in Apostle's book. So actually, when I was an undergrad, I studied the definition of limb soup exactly like I presented, and I think that's in Apostle's book, because Rudin's book I think presents it as sort of superior. I mean, the supremum of all the subsequential limits, which is I think conceptually a better thing to. A better definition, but in practice, Apostle's definition is, I think, more useful.
And Apostle and much easier Kenneth A. Ross is there. Real analysis by
Kenneth Ross. Yeah. That's a good point. Yeah, Kenneth Ross. That's a good. It's called, I think, undergraduate analysis or something, right? Yeah. Okay. Any other questions? All right, then I guess should I log out or?
Yeah. Thank you.